From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
Going back to about summer of 2020, I think I first noticed some symptoms. And at that point, I called up the GP and was told that I probably had piles.
Holly Masters is 28. She lives in London and she's an actor. 6 years ago, she went to the doctor for what seemed like a relatively innocuous condition, until it wasn't.
Being 22 at the time, no one would have thought it was bowel cancer.
It took a fateful trip to A&E a year later before Holly was properly diagnosed.
I remember being in the hospital and having to ring up my now fiancé and tell him that they think I have cancer was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
Holly's life changed in an instant. She was told she had stage 3 cancer and was plunged into cycles of radiotherapy and chemotherapy, having to stop working and seeing friends to avoid any risk of infection. All in her early 20s.
That's a time where you should be out having fun, figuring out who you are. Maybe you're going to university or you're starting your career, and then cancer comes along and knocks you sideways and changes your life.
Thankfully, Holly is now in remission, but her case isn't as much of an anomaly as you'd think. Bowel cancer in young people has doubled since the early 1990s, while it seems to be going down in older people. So what's going on? With scientists in a race to find a solution, why do they think young people are more vulnerable now? The story today, unravelling a medical mystery. Why are more young people getting bowel cancer?
There's been a lot of, high-profile bowel cancer deaths in recent years.
Ben Spencer, science editor of the Sunday Times, has been digging into one of cancer research's most worrying and perplexing trends.
Just recently, James van der Beek died at a very young age, 48 with 6 children. Everyone remembers him as Dawson from Dawson's Creek, this young teenager on the brink of adulthood. And you think, God, he's gone from bowel cancer. Bowel cancer is a disease of old age. That's how we think of it. There was Deborah James, who was 40, the bowel babe. These cases shock people because they're in the prime of their lives. And we think of bowel cancer as something which affects old people. Now, just to be clear, this is still a disease of old age. 94% of cases in Britain of bowel cancer are to people over the age of 50. But there's something really strange going on with bowel cancer, which is, on the whole, cases are going down. Cases of elderly people with bowel cancer are going down. But this small group of people under the age of 50, that's going up. And no one really knows why. One doctor said to me, this is the big mystery in cancer at the moment. It's the thing that everyone's kind of work out. So it's a real puzzle.
So, Ben, as you said, you as science editor, you keep in touch with a lot of the research community. This is a question they're slightly obsessed by. From the people you've been talking to, what are the theories for why this is increasing in younger people right now? Talk us through some of them.
So I spent a lot of time trying to get to the bottom of this. And every scientist I spoke to, on the whole, had a different explanation, which is quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And it's because the evidence is pretty weak. So just to take a step back, there's been a theory in recent years that cancer amongst young people on the whole is growing. And we look at numbers of prostate cancer going up, particularly among the young, breast cancer, thyroid cancer, bladder cancer. So there's been a lot of kind of head scratching over this. And people talk about something called the exposome, which is all the things you've been exposed to throughout your life, from the things we eat to air pollution to microplastics to new chemicals. And there's kind of this theory...
Ultra-processed foods.
Ultra-processed foods. And there's this theory that something has changed in the last kind of 50 years, which means that young people under the age of 50, have been exposed to something that older generations haven't. And that must explain what this surge of cancers amongst young people.
And that's all cancers, not just bowel cancer.
We're talking about all cancers. However, once you dig into the numbers, a lot of people are skeptical about this because they say we're simply getting better at spotting cancer. We're getting better at testing for it. We're getting better at screening. For example, prostate cancer. The number of prostate cancer cases seen in the UK has jumped 20% in the last couple of years. That's the Chris Hoy effect. Lots of people are now going to get tested. And we've had this influx of people going to the doctors. So there's this big surge of people with prostate cancer. However, most of those tend to be people with minor prostate cancer. And the theory is the number of people with cancer hasn't changed. It's just the minor cases that weren't picked up before are now being picked up earlier and they're younger. So when people have crunched the numbers, they found thyroid cancer. We're getting better at testing for it, getting better at picking it up. Prostate cancer, the same. Breast cancer, probably the same. Kidney cancer, possibly the same. Bowel cancer, there's a difference. Because bowel cancer, it's not just these minor cases, it's the severe cases which are also going up. And you've got this dichotomy where the cases amongst the elderly is going down and the cases amongst the young is going up. So this is the only cancer where after all the numbers have been crunched internationally, bowel cancer is the one where you have a very obvious signal that there's something happening amongst the young.
That's fascinating. So something has changed. Once you've crunched all the numbers, you've gone through the stats, you've tried to work out anomalies, you've looked at the fact that people are reporting more, it still looks like something fundamentally is changing. Young people are getting bowel cancer more than they used to.
Yeah, and we're still talking about small numbers.
Yeah.
You've got 44,000 cases in Britain a year. Of those, 2,600 are younger than 50. But that number's kind of gone up about 50% since the 1990s.
Which is extraordinary.
And globally, in some countries, it's doubled. So the World Health Organization did a big study last year where they looked at America, Canada, Australia, and England. And they found that people born in 1960 were 8 times less likely to develop bowel cancer at a young age than those people born in 1995. Between 1960 and 1995, the risk of developing bowel cancer before the age of 50 went up 8-fold.
What on earth is going on to make so much difference in 3.5 decades?
So there's a number of theories. Post-war, 1960s, 1970s, you've got huge changes. You've got industrialization, huge changes to the way people are treated in hospital. This is the first generation to really be treated on the NHS. You've got industrialized food for the first time. You've got people doing different jobs. So we're talking about an era of huge, profound social change.
Yeah.
And this is where you start to think, what do we know about bowel cancer? What are the risk factors? Number one, alcohol. Has alcohol intake changed in that period? If anything, it's gone down, in Britain at least. Meat intake, red meat, processed meat, probably went up and then potentially down again more recently. Fibre intake. Fibre is known to be really protective against bowel cancer. Now, that's where the scientists I've spoken to think you might be getting onto something. The very act of processing food gets rid of a lot of the fibre. So if we used to eat a lot of more simple food, stuff that wasn't made in factories, it wasn't as highly processed, we are eating way less fibre than we should in our diet. So that's one risk factor. We know obesity is a big risk factor for bowel cancer. And we know obesity is a big problem.
And that's presumably gone up in those decades.
Yeah, hugely, particularly in the US. Now, interestingly, US bowel cancer rates amongst the young are twice that than they are in Britain.
Wow. So whatever it is, it's happening even more in America.
Yeah.
Is exercise in that case another likely factor? Because it does feel like we probably exercised more in the 60s than we do now.
Yeah, life is easier now, right? And it's not just about going to the gym or playing sport or going for that run. It's about, in 1960, most houses didn't have washing machines. You know, you are manually washing your clothes. Most people didn't own a car. They are walking, taking a bus, walking again, or riding a bike. There's been a lot of focus in the last 20, 30, 40 years about exercise. But it's not just about exercise, it's about activity, about being active, about not sitting.
Kids being out rather than being in front of screens.
Or, you know, even since the pandemic, you know, we get food delivered to our door rather than cooking it ourselves. You know, things have changed a lot just in a few years. The problem with that argument is that if it's down to our diet, you would have thought it would affect older people as well as younger people. But the number of cases amongst the elderly is going down. So what's happening?
What else are people looking into?
So the other big one, which is kind of related, is the microbiome.
I'm constantly being told to worry about mine.
Is the bacteria in your gut. And so we've all got lots of bacteria in our gut. And the year before last, there was a big study which found the imprint of a bacteria, a strain of E. coli in bowel cancer. So these scientists, they were led by the World Health Organization. They looked at about 1,000 people's tumours from around the world, took biopsies, and they looked at the DNA of these tumours, and they found the imprint of this strain of E. coli.
So hang on, just in scientific terms, what does that mean? Does that mean that you've come into contact with an E. coli and that has caused the cancer, or it has detected an E. coli and that's kind of melded with? I mean, what does it mean? Is that a potential cause?
What they think is that the E. coli has emitted a toxin, and the toxin has caused a mutation in your bowels, which has caused a tumour. And by looking at the DNA of your tumour, you can kind of see the imprint of the original toxin. They looked at 1,000 tumours from 11 countries from around the world, and they found this imprint from this toxin again and again and again in people's tumours. Now, crucially, for those under the age of 40, this was 3 times more common than it was in those over the age of 70. So it's a smoking gun.
Yeah.
Or so they think. Now, it doesn't explain why young people have that. And it doesn't explain all bowel cancers.
Yeah.
But it definitely points to a potential reason that the number has risen so dramatically from babies born in 1960, 1970 onwards.
And this E. coli, is there any theory as to where it's coming from?
So it's really hard to tell and it's really hard to unpick because we all have E. coli in our guts. And as I said, even the people over the age of 70 had this particular strain of E. coli.
Right, but just less of it.
But just less of it. So what happened in the 1960s? One theory is that this dates back to birth. What the epidemiologists found when they looked at numbers of people around the world, that the risk wasn't just higher amongst people younger than 50, it increased right down to the age of 20. Something happens in childhood or their teens or infancy. When we're born, we have no bacteria in our gut, really. Our guts are colonized by bacteria in those first few days, weeks of childhood. And a theory, and this is still just a theory, is that something about the way we're born has changed in the 1960s. And that kind of stacks up because before then, a lot of people were born at home.
Yeah.
people would have been born without antibiotics. We've had a big rise in caesarean sections. We've had a big change in the way babies are fed, lower rates of breastfeeding. And all of these things change the balance of bacteria in your gut. If you use antibiotics, you kill a lot of bacteria, good and bad. And the theory is that killing off good bacteria might make way for these bad bugs, the E. coli, which is causing these diseases.
I mean, you mentioned something clearly changed in the 60s. People would have been more likely to be born at home before then. This is suddenly the NHS, people are being born in hospitals. What's changed since then to make it so much more common? Because it does seem like whatever it is, it's accelerating as the years go on.
Well, because obviously it takes years and years to develop cancer, we're talking about people dying in their 40s or 30s. So tracing that back to birth and all the exposures you've had throughout your life since you came into being, everything you've ever eaten, all the drugs you've ever taken, all the pollutants you've been exposed to, just unpicking that is incredibly difficult. But we know breastfeeding rates are going down. We know C-section rates are going up. We know antibiotic use has been going up massively. And none of this is assigning blame because
we still haven't got to the bottom of the science now.
We haven't got to the bottom
up until now.
And also, it's, it's not to say that's the thing that caused it. And yes, you might need antibiotics to save a baby's life or a mother's life. And yes, people can't always breastfeed. And no, they can't always be born safely through natural birth.
Yeah.
I mean, these are life and death decisions that doctors, mothers, nurses, midwives are making right then to save a baby and a mother right then, rather than thinking about what's going to happen down the line.
So there's this wonderful forgotten room in a basement of a hospital, St Mark's Hospital, which is in Harrow in West London.
That's Professor Trevor Graham, Director of the Centre for Evolution and Cancer at the Institute for Cancer in London. He's been given access to one of the largest archives of bowel tissue in the world, with samples that date back over at least a century. He believes that what's stored in that basement could help to explain the puzzling rise in bowel cancer.
A large room covered floor to ceiling with shelves, and those shelves are stacked 2 boxes deep with boxes of old specimens, mainly of cancer, but also of bowel specimens that have been collected and stored from patients over the past 100 years, perhaps even slightly longer.
And when you say specimens, I mean, these aren't sort of jars with formaldehyde. How are they kept?
So if someone has surgery, the surgical sample will often need to be looked at by a pathologist. That's a doctor who looks at specimens under a microscope. And so to enable that to happen, the samples are first preserved. So they're fixed in formalin and then they're stored in wax blocks. And so in all of these boxes in this dusty basement room, they're stacked with these small pieces of paraffin wax with pieces of tissue stored inside them. They remind me a little bit of, people are familiar with this idea from Jurassic Park of flies caught in amber. And there's this, they look a bit like that. They're really old samples, have a slight yellowy orange tinge to them. And inside is this piece of tissue, which we think has really important information locked away about bowel cancers.
That's remarkable. So you've got lots of little sort of wax fossils of bits of people's bowels, effectively. I mean, just give us a sense of the scale. How many are we talking about and how far back do these records go?
So there are many thousands of samples in there, probably tens of thousands of samples in there. We don't know exactly how far back they go. They certainly go back to the creation of the NHS in the 1950s. And we've already found cases that go back before that, so before the Second World War into the 1930s. We think there might be some from around the turn of the last century as well.
Wow.
It's unlikely they go back much earlier than that because not many people would have had surgery a long time ago because many of the surgeries that we might take for granted today were just not possible. But there might be a few odd ones that are even from the end of the century before.
That's remarkable. So what do you do with this amazing archive? What are you hoping to find?
Yeah, so we're treating all these samples like a time machine that gives us a window into what happened in the past. So the motivation we have for looking at them is to understand something that's happening today. So when we look today, there's a rapid, alarming increase in bowel cancer in young adults under the age of 50. And we really don't know what's driving that increase. Clearly, something has changed out there in our environment or the way that we interact with it. And we think we can use this archive of old cancer samples stored in this wonderful dusty room as a window into those changes that have happened over the past decades.
So just describe the process a bit. I mean, how do you go about doing this?
We should talk about what we think it could be, but we think the environment essentially leaves scars recording the exposure that someone's had in their life. And so our goal really is to read out those scars, read out what those exposures were, and then look at how those exposures have changed over the decades up until the present day. Things which have changed, these exposures which have changed, they may be the cause of this rapid rise in bowel cancer in young adults that we see today.
What are the things you're specifically looking for at the moment?
Well, we're right at the beginning of this process. Where we're going to look first is around the gut microbiome. That's the bugs that live in our bowels. There's evidence by looking at cases of bowel cancer in young adults that have occurred in the present day, contemporary cases, that about half of those contemporary cases of bowel cancer in young adults might be caused by a particular kind of E. coli that lives in the person's bowel. And that kind of E. coli can damage the lining of the bowel. And we think that damage can lead to the cancer growing at some later point in time. And so we know from contemporary data that about half of cancers in young adults today show evidence of damage by these so-called bad bugs. And our question is about how frequent were these potentially bad bugs in the past.
Are there other factors that you're looking for?
We're going to start by looking at these bugs because this really is a smoking gun. These bugs potentially explain half of cases. So this really is the most important first place to look. But more speculatively, we have some ideas that we might be able to learn from this idea that exposures leave scars in the cells, that what other exposures may have been over the past decade. So there's lots of hypotheses out there, lots of ideas about what might be driving this increase in bowel cancer. And they range from things like changes in diet, changes in the amount of exercise people do, things like microplastics exposures, some idea that it could be something around pesticide exposure. There's also some evidence it could be air pollution. We speculate that those different kinds of exposure might leave different marks in the cancers themselves or in other cells in the bowel. And we're going to try and look at those other marks and see if we can learn what is the exposure driving this.
If you find enough evidence to support the hypothesis that it is this E. coli that has changed, that's the factor that has led to this increase in bowel cancer in younger people, what does that mean in terms of treatment? I mean, do you start looking for that E. coli in people's microbiomes? Is that something you can fix, potentially?
Yeah, there are many different things we could think about doing. We could think about preventative strategies of how we might support people to have a healthy microbiome and stop those bad bugs getting in the first place. And that might be something that needs to happen early in people's lives, perhaps even in childhood. Other things are we might be able to have tests to see if people have the damage done by these potentially bad bugs, and those people could then be offered lots of screening. Like we already have bowel cancer screening for older adults. It may be the case that screening people who are particularly at high risk because they have evidence of these bad bugs could be really beneficial, but we don't know yet. We have to, first of all, prove that the so-called bad bugs really are bad and really are the driver of bowel cancer in young adults.
And give us a sense of the timeline on this. I mean, it sounds like you have thousands and thousands of samples to get through. Do you have any sense of how long it'll take to try to work out if it is the E. coli that is the cause?
Well, we're just at the start of the process, and research is, a journey of discovery, and we never quite know where that journey is going to take us. But we're hopeful that within a few years, we'll have good signals coming from the data that we've generated. So ask me in a couple of years' time and I'll tell you how we're getting on.
We've been told that amongst research scientists, this is almost the holy grail. It is the great question that keeps coming back. Why is bowel cancer increasing in young people? And I suppose if you find the key to it, it might also explain why so many other cancers seem to be increasing in younger people. Are you optimistic? Is this something you think we can solve in the next few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we already have this smoking gun of these so-called bad bugs, and if we can find other factors too, it's so important that we know what it is, and as soon as we know what it is, we can do something about it. Another reason I really love doing this research is because this room that we've described with all the samples in, it's an amazing, visual place, but it's also in many ways a room that's full of pain of the past. All of the bowel cancer samples in there represent someone's life who was affected by cancer in the decades gone by. And what I really like is that we might be able to take that pain of the past and turn it into some hope for the future.
That was Trevor Graham, a scientist at the Institute of Cancer Research. You also heard from Ben Spencer, science editor of the Sunday Times. The producers today were Julia Webster and Sophie McNulty. The executive producer was Kate Lamble, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Assetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to get in touch about this or any other story, do drop us a line to thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.